Alright everybody, so welcome back to Jim Bob's Garden. So today we're going to talk about weeds. Weeds. Every gardener's bane. The constant, ongoing battle between the gardener and the weeds. Alright? So, there's a couple of things that we need to talk about. One, do I even need to pull weeds? Well, now, hang on. Don't you have to? Well, maybe. And that's kind of a decision that everybody has to make. There are some weeds that if you don't pull them, you're going to run into trouble. Like we reach down here and grab that. Well, that's nut grass. Hang on. Get a better example here. This is what's called nut grass. Alright, nut sedge, whatever. Alright, so this weed has this little nut. I don't know if you can see that or not. There's a little nut right there that grows, and that provides food for that plant. So if I don't get that nut out of there, I'm going to continue to grow grass. And my garden is not a lawn, even though the grass seems to grow better here than it does in my lawn, which I think is pretty interesting. I don't want this to basically take over and basically just completely cover my garden. I don't want my garden to turn into a lawn, so stuff like that needs to get pulled out. If you don't, you can see this has got a runner on it, and that runner is going out, and at the end of this runner it'll find a spot where, for whatever reason, it decides it's a better spot to grow, and it'll grow another nut grass there, and it'll grow another nut, and then that will actually spread out, and pretty soon your whole garden is covered with a lawn. Alright, which is not something that I want to do. So, how to get rid of it? Well, there's a couple different ways and a couple different tools. Alright, so I got my hoe and I got my hooker. Alright, so I don't really know what it's called. A tiller maybe. But this here has got a nice little hook on it. It's got sharp points. And it's really nice to dig down into the dirt. Now, one of the advantages to this is that when you stick it in the ground, you can pull up and the roots will come out to a certain extent and give you better access to like dollarweed and things like that. It's a great way to till up the soil itself, but it does actually disturb the soil, which is not necessarily great for like a no-till garden, because obviously one of the things that you want is you want life under the soil. Well, every time you dig that soil up and expose it to air and sunlight, you're killing off microbes and such that are growing in your soil. So that's okay. It's I mean, it is part of the process. The other thing is a hoe. Now a hoe, the advantage to a hoe is if you take it and use it like it's supposed to be used, and you just chop the top, it'll take the top off, but it will leave the soil undisturbed if you just take the very top layer. But then we go back to the nut grass, and basically all I'm going to do is take the top off of this, and it's still going to be there in the ground growing. Alright, so what's the best way? Well, it kind of depends on you and what you want to do. If you stay on top of your hoeing, eventually this nut will use up all of its energy trying to regrow grass, and will kill it off eventually. When it comes to dollarweed, when you go to doing this, basically all you're doing is chopping it off and you're leaving all these roots behind, and that will just continue to regrow. Alright, so not so good. There are chemical methods, but I mean, come on, it's a garden. Really? You're going to dump a bunch of chemicals in it to kill the weeds? You know, I mean, you're probably going to kill everything else too, so I highly discourage using chemicals of any sort. I'll be honest with you, I'm tempted to just leave the weeds alone, except for the grass, which is what I do in my food forest. But in this area, I want to do some planting. I've got corn here, and I'm going to do a modified Three Sisters kind of thing. So I want to get some beans planted up in my corn. In order to do that, I really need to get some of this dollarweed taken care of. Now what I do have here is I've got a lot of fluffy soil that's very loose, so I can get in there with my hands and pull it out, all right, for the most part, which is what I'm going to do. Now to do that, what I highly recommend is a couple other tools, and that is a bucket. And the reason I have a bucket is so that I can basically take all this and put it in my compost rather than just throwing it on the ground. And then I have a stool. Now this is for the old people, because you can bend over and squat down and do all this, but when you get up to be my age, you're like, you know what, how about if I put a stool there I can sit on and do it as I go. So that's what we're going to do today, is I'm going to go ahead and start pulling out some of the weeds. I'm going to collect them for my compost, and make this a much nicer, neater, cleaner looking bed, along with opening up the soil so I can get some stuff planted into it and get my three sisters going. All right, so should you remove your weeds? Again, up to you, kind of depends. I saw a garden that grew a fantastic amount of potatoes all up inside of a bunch of grass and everything else. And again, the weeds will shade, they will help retain moisture, and they're one of the most natural things to grow in your area is weeds. That's why we call them weeds. It'll also improve the life of the soil, believe it or not. For the most part, there's a lot of weeds that actually improve the life inside your soil, because I mean, it's been shown that the more roots and everything you have down inside your soil, the more life there is. And there's even some talk about roots communicating with each other and passing back and forth different chemical benefits. So you know, you may actually be better off, and this is what I do in my well, what I'm going to do this year in my food forest areas, is I'm just going to let it grow. If I see a lot of nut grass, or if I see a lot of other grass, I'll probably pull some of that out, because otherwise, like I said, it'll eventually convert back into a lawn, and that's not something I want. So pulling weeds, yes or no, that's up to you. But if you're going to plant, usually you're going to want some kind of a clear, open area to plant your seeds into. All right, so thanks once again for stopping by. Do me a favor, like, subscribe. Let me know what you think. And I'm going to get to pulling some weeds.